You don't seem to want to accept the fact that you're dealing with an expert in guerrilla warfare.
100 men against your boy is a no-win situation for us.
You send that many, don't. A good supply of body bags.
First blood. John Rambo.
Morning. Jump in. I'll make sure you're heading the right direction, huh?
Law against me getting something here?
Yeah, me. carrying a concealed weapon.
They knew he was innocent. And they didn't give a damn.
Crack. Don't move. I don't want you to cut your own throat.
He was a soldier forgotten by his country, a broken bar, but when pushed too far, he became a one-man army, hunted, cornered, and forced to fight back. Survival is his only mission. This is where the legend began, a broken bar. This is Rambo, First Blood, 1982, only on M Cinema Reviews. First Blood is a 1982 American war action film starring Sylvester Stallone as John Rambo, a Vietnam War veteran. Directed by Ted Koch and co-written by Michael Cosell, William Sackheim, and Stallone, the film is based on David Morrell's 1972 novel of the same name. It is the first entry in the Rambo film series, later followed by Rambo, First Blood Part 2. The story follows Rambo as he clashes with local police in a small town and becomes the target of a manhunt, relying on his survival and combat skills to stay alive. The film also stars Richard Crenna as Colonel Sam Troutman, Rambo's mentor, and Brian Dennehy as Sheriff Will Teasle. Released in the United States on October 22, 1982, the film received mixed reviews at first but became a major box office success, earning $160.3 million worldwide and ranking among the top-grossing films of the year. In 1985, it became the first Hollywood blockbuster released in China, where it set long-standing records for ticket sales. Over time, critics have reappraised the film, praising the performances of Stallone, Dennehy, and Crenna, and recognizing it as a landmark in the action genre. The film's success launched the Rambo franchise, which went on to include 4 sequels, an animated television series, comic books, novels, and multiple video games. In December 1981, Vietnam War veteran John Rambo learns that his last surviving comrade has died from illness caused by Agent Orange exposure. Left adrift and without purpose, he wanders into the small town of Hope, Washington. There, Sheriff Will Teasle confronts him, viewing Rambo as a drifter, and forces him out of town. When Rambo tries to return, Teasle arrests him. At the station, Teasle's deputies mistreat him, triggering traumatic flashbacks of his time as a prisoner of war. Overwhelmed, Rambo escapes custody, fighting his way into the surrounding mountains. Teasle launches a manhunt, but the pursuit soon turns deadly. Deputy Art Galt attempts to shoot Rambo from a helicopter, only to fall to his death when Rambo defends himself. Authorities discover Rambo's identity as a decorated Special Forces soldier and Medal of Honor recipient, but Teasle refuses to end the search. Rambo tries to surrender peacefully, but when the deputies open fire, he retreats deeper into the wilderness. Using his survival training, he sets traps and incapacitates his pursuers, sparing their lives but warning Teasle to stop hunting him. The conflict escalates as state police, the National Guard, and Rambo's former commander, Colonel Sam Troutman, arrive. Troutman warns Teasle that Rambo cannot be defeated in the field, but Teasle ignores him. When Rambo takes refuge in an abandoned mine, the guard collapses the entrance with rocket fire, believing him dead. However, Rambo escapes through a ventilation shaft and hijacks a military truck, returning to hope for a final showdown. In town, Rambo sets fires, cuts power, and destroys a gas station and gun shop, creating chaos before storming the sheriff's office with an M60 machine gun. He gravely wounds Teasle, who lies helpless on the floor. Troutman intervenes, persuading Rambo to stand down. In an emotional breakdown, Rambo reveals the pain of his wartime trauma and the mistreatment he faced upon returning home. Overcome, he finally surrenders to Troutman, who escorts him into custody, while the wounded Teasle is rushed away for treatment. The Definitive Guide to First Blood, 1982, casting, from page to screen introduction. The year 1982 marked a pivotal moment in cinema history with the release of First Blood, a film that would not only launch one of the most successful action franchises of all time but also redefine the Vietnam War veteran narrative in popular culture. Based on David Morrell's 1972 novel, this American war action film starring Sylvester Stallone as Vietnam War veteran John Rambo was directed by Ted Koch and co-written by Michael Cosell, William Sackheim and Stallone. The casting process for this seminal film was both intricate and crucial, as it required actors who could embody the complex themes of war trauma, small-town prejudice, and the struggle of veterans returning to an unwelcoming society. The casting of First Blood represents a masterclass in character-driven filmmaking, where each role was carefully selected to serve the larger narrative about post-Vietnam America. From the tortured protagonist John Rambo to the obstinate Sheriff Will Teasle, from the understanding Colonel Sam Troutman to the various townspeople and law enforcement officers, every casting decision contributed to the film's eventual success and cultural impact. This comprehensive examination of the casting process reveals not only the decisions made but also the alternatives considered, the audition processes undertaken, and the creative reasoning behind each choice. The genesis of a character. Casting John Rambo. Sylvester Stallone's journey to Rambo. The casting of Sylvester Stallone as John Rambo was not immediately obvious, despite what hindsight might suggest. Following his breakout success with Rocky in 1976, Stallone had established himself as both an actor and screenwriter capable of bringing working-class characters to life with authenticity and emotional depth. However, the transition from the optimistic boxer Rocky Balboa to the traumatized Vietnam veteran John Rambo required a significant shift in both physical and emotional preparation. Stallone's involvement in First Blood began when he became attached to the project not just as an actor but as a co-writer, working alongside Michael Cosell and William Sackheim to adapt Morrell's novel for the screen. This dual role allowed him to shape the character of Rambo from the inside out, ensuring that the portrayal would be both physically convincing and emotionally resonant. The actor's commitment to authenticity extended beyond the script. He underwent intensive physical training and survival preparation to credibly portray a former Green Beret. The casting decision was ultimately validated by Stallone's ability to convey vulnerability beneath Rambo's exterior toughness. Unlike many action heroes of the era, Rambo was conceived as a deeply damaged individual whose violence stems from trauma rather than heroism. Stallone's performance successfully balanced the character's lethal capabilities with his psychological fragility, creating a protagonist who was simultaneously fierce and sympathetic. Physical transformation and preparation. Stallone's physical preparation for the role of Rambo set a new standard for method acting in action films. Understanding that Rambo was not just a soldier but a survival expert and former Special Forces operative, Stallone underwent months of intensive training. This included survival techniques, weapons training, and physical conditioning that would allow him to perform many of his own stunts. The actor's dedication to authenticity extended to his appearance, with Stallone adopting a lean, muscular physique that differed significantly from the bulkier look he would later adopt for characters like Rocky Balboa in later films. This physical transformation was crucial for establishing Rambo's credibility as a character who could survive in the wilderness using only his wits and training. Alternative casting considerations. While Stallone ultimately became synonymous with the character of John Rambo, the casting process reportedly considered several other actors for the role. The search for Rambo required finding someone who could embody both the character's military background and his emotional vulnerability. Actors who were reportedly considered included those with military experience or those who had previously portrayed similar characters in other films. The decision to cast Stallone was influenced by several factors beyond his acting ability. His involvement as a co-writer meant he had an intimate understanding of the character's motivations and arc. Additionally, his proven ability to carry a film, demonstrated with Rocky, made him an attractive choice for what was intended to be a character-driven action film. The authority figure, Richard Crenna as Colonel Sam Troutman. A career-defining role. Richard Crenna's casting as Rambo's mentor Colonel Sam Troutman represented one of the most inspired choices in the film's casting process. Crenna, who had established himself in both comedy and drama through television and film, brought a gravitas and paternal authority to the role that was essential for the character's function in the narrative. Colonel Troutman serves as more than just Rambo's former commanding officer. He is the bridge between Rambo's military past and his civilian present, the voice of reason in a situation spiraling toward tragedy, and ultimately the only person who truly understands what Rambo has endured. Crenna's performance required him to convey this understanding while also representing the military establishment that had trained Rambo and then abandoned him. Crenna's background and suitability. Richard Crenna's extensive background in television and film made him an ideal choice for Colonel Troutman. His work in series like The Real McCoys and Our Miss Brooks had established him as a reliable character actor capable of both humor and drama. More importantly for First Blood, his work in war films and military-themed productions had given him experience in portraying authority figures with authenticity and nuance. Crenna's approach to the character was influenced by his understanding of the Vietnam War's impact on both veterans and the military establishment. His portrayal of Troutman as someone who genuinely cares for his former soldiers while also representing the institution that had failed them created a complex character who could serve multiple narrative functions. The mentor-student dynamic. The casting of Crenna opposite Stallone created a believable mentor-student relationship that was crucial for the film's emotional core. Despite their age difference, Crenna was able to establish Troutman as someone who had earned Rambo's respect and trust through shared experience and genuine concern. This relationship provided the film with moments of quiet reflection amidst the action sequences. The chemistry between Stallone and Crenna was evident from their first scenes together, with Crenna's calm, measured delivery providing a counterpoint to Stallone's more intense approach. This dynamic would prove so effective that Crenna would reprise the role of Troutman in subsequent Rambo films, becoming an integral part of the franchise's success. The antagonist, Brian Dennehy as Sheriff Will Teasle. Casting against type. Brian Dennehy's casting as the primary antagonist Sheriff Will Teasle was a crucial decision that elevated the film above typical action movie fare. Dennehy, known primarily for his work in theater and television, brought a complexity to the role that made Teasle more than just a villainous small-town sheriff. Instead, Dennehy portrayed him as a man whose prejudices and small-minded authority complex lead to tragic consequences. The casting of Dennehy was significant because it avoided the typical Hollywood approach of casting an obviously villainous actor in the antagonist role. Instead, Dennehy's everyman appearance and natural authority made Teasle seem like a real small-town sheriff, someone who might genuinely believe he was protecting his community from an undesirable vagrant. Dennehy's interpretation of Teasle. Dennehy's approach to Sheriff Teasle was informed by his understanding of small-town politics and the mindset of local law enforcement in the early 1980s. His portrayal avoided caricature by presenting Teasle as someone who was acting according to his own moral code, However misguided, this approach made the character more unsettling because his actions seemed to come from a place of genuine conviction rather than pure malice. The actor's background in theater provided him with the skills necessary to create a fully realized character within the relatively limited screen time allocated to Teasel's development. Dennehy's performance established the sheriff's authority, his prejudices, and his ultimate inability to comprehend what he was dealing with when he encountered Rambo. The law enforcement perspective. Dennehy's casting was also significant for how it represented law enforcement in the film. Rather than presenting all police officers as inherently corrupt or malicious, the film uses Teasel's character to explore how ordinary people in positions of authority can abuse their power when confronted with something they don't understand. Dennehy's performance suggested that Teasel might have been a competent sheriff in normal circumstances, but his encounter with Rambo revealed his limitations and prejudices. Supporting cast. Building a community. Bill McKinney as Deputy Galt. Bill McKinney's casting as Deputy Galt provided the film with its most overtly antagonistic law enforcement character. McKinney, who had gained notoriety for his disturbing performance in Deliverance, brought a menacing presence to the role of the deputy who takes particular pleasure in harassing Rambo. McKinney's portrayal of Galt was crucial for establishing the tone of the harassment that Rambo faces early in the film. Unlike Dennehy's more complex portrayal of Sheriff Teasel, McKinney's Galt is presented as someone who enjoys exercising power over those he perceives as vulnerable. This characterization serves to justify Rambo's eventual violent response while also representing a type of law enforcement officer that audiences could easily condemn. The actor's previous work in films that explored themes of rural violence and power abuse made him an ideal choice for this role. McKinney's ability to convey casual cruelty without resorting to obvious villainy added authenticity to the character and helped establish the atmosphere of small-town prejudice that drives the film's conflict. David Caruso as Deputy Mitch. David Caruso had parts in such films as First Blood, 1982, before his later television success. His role as Deputy Mitch represented one of his early film appearances, and his casting demonstrated the attention to detail that went into even the smaller roles in the film. Caruso's portrayal of Deputy Mitch provided a contrast to McKinney's more aggressive Galt. As a younger, less experienced deputy, Mitch served to show how ordinary people can become complicit in abuse of power through inaction or peer pressure. Caruso's performance suggested someone who might have moral qualms about the treatment of Rambo but lacks the courage or authority to intervene. This casting choice was significant for how it represented different types of law enforcement officers within the same department. While Teasel represents misguided authority and Galt represents sadistic abuse of power, Mitch represents the bystander who fails to prevent escalation. This nuanced approach to depicting law enforcement added depth to the film's exploration of institutional power and individual responsibility. The townspeople and community characters. The casting of the various townspeople and community members in First Blood was crucial for establishing the atmosphere of the small Pacific Northwest town where the story unfolds. These characters, while having limited screen time, needed to convincingly portray a community that would ostracize a veteran and support their sheriff's actions against him. The ensemble of character actors chosen for these roles helped create a believable small-town environment where conformity and suspicion of outsiders were the norm. Their performances, while brief, established the social dynamics that made Rambo's persecution seem plausible within the context of the story. Each of these smaller roles was cast with an eye toward authenticity, with actors who could convincingly portray the types of people who might populate a small logging town in the Pacific Northwest. The collective performance helped create the sense that Rambo was not just facing individual opponents but an entire community that viewed him as an unwelcome intruder. Stunt performers and action specialists. The unsung heroes of action sequences. The stunt team included professionals like Benny E. Dobbins, stunts and stunt double for Brian Dennehy, Diamond Farnsworth, stunts and stunt double for Sylvester Stallone, and Bobby Sargent, stunts and stunt double for both Jack Starrett and Sylvester Stallone. These performers were crucial for bringing the film's action sequences to life while ensuring the safety of the principal actors. The casting of experienced stunt performers was essential given the film's emphasis on practical effects and realistic action sequences. The mountainous terrain and survival-themed set pieces required professionals who could perform complex stunts safely while maintaining the illusion that the principal actors were performing these actions themselves. Diamond Farnsworth's work as Stallone's stunt double was particularly significant given the physical demands of the role. Stallone performed many of his own stunts, but for the most dangerous sequences, Farnsworth's expertise was crucial for maintaining both safety standards and the film's commitment to realistic action. Coordinating action and character. The integration of stunt work with character development was one of the film's strengths, and this required careful coordination between the principal actors and their stunt doubles. The casting of stunt performers who could believably double for the main actors while maintaining the characters' distinct movement styles was crucial for this integration. The action sequences in First Blood were designed to serve the character development rather than simply provide spectacle. This meant that the stunt performers needed to understand not just the physical requirements of their roles but also how their work contributed to the overall narrative and character arcs. The casting director's vision selecting for authenticity. The overall casting strategy for First Blood reflected a commitment to authenticity that was unusual for action films of the early 1980s. Rather than casting based solely on star power or physical appearance, the casting process prioritized actors who could bring psychological realism to their roles. This approach was evident in choices like casting Brian Dennehy, who was not typically associated with action films, as the primary antagonist. Similarly, the selection of Richard Crenna, who was better known for television work, as Colonel Troutman demonstrated a commitment to finding the right actor for each role rather than the most obvious choice. Balancing star power and character acting. The casting strategy successfully balanced the need for recognizable stars who could attract audiences with lesser-known character actors who could provide authentic supporting performances. Stallone's star power, established through Rocky, provided the film with commercial appeal while the supporting cast of experienced character actors provided the authenticity necessary for the film's serious themes. This balance was crucial for the film's success, as it needed to function both as an action film that could attract mainstream audiences and as a serious exploration of veterans' issues that required believable performances throughout the cast. Director Ted Koch's influence on casting. The director's vision. Director Ted Koch played a crucial role in shaping the casting choices for First Blood. His background in both television and film, including work on serious dramas, influenced the decision to prioritize character development over pure action spectacle. Koch's approach to directing actors was informed by his theater background and his commitment to exploring the psychological dimensions of the characters. This directorial philosophy influenced casting decisions by prioritizing actors who could handle both the physical demands of their roles and the emotional complexity required by the script. Working with actors. Koch's collaborative approach with his actors was evident in the performances delivered in the final film. His ability to work with different types of actors, from method actors like Stallone to character actors like Dennehy and Crenna, helped create a cohesive ensemble despite the varied backgrounds of the cast members. The director's influence on the casting process was also evident in the decision to cast actors who could handle the film's tonal shifts from intense action sequences to quieter character moments. This versatility was essential for a film that needed to function as both entertainment and social commentary. The legacy of First Blood's casting choices. Impact on careers. The casting of First Blood had significant impacts on the careers of its principal actors. For Stallone, it established him as an action star capable of carrying a franchise, leading to 4 more Rambo films and cementing his status as one of the most recognizable action stars of the 1980s and beyond. Richard Crenna's portrayal of Colonel Troutman became one of his most memorable roles, leading to his appearances in subsequent Rambo films and helping to establish him as a go-to actor for authority figure roles in action films. His work in the franchise demonstrated his ability to bring gravitas to supporting roles in genre films. Brian Dennehy's performance as Sheriff Teasle showcased his range as an actor and helped establish him as a character actor capable of playing complex antagonists. While he did not appear in subsequent Rambo films, His work in First Blood contributed to a career that included numerous memorable supporting roles in both film and television. Influence on action film casting. The casting approach used for First Blood influenced how subsequent action films approached character development and actor selection. The film's success demonstrated that audiences were receptive to action films that prioritized character development and psychological realism alongside spectacular action sequences. The decision to cast experienced character actors in supporting roles became a template that many successful action films would follow. This approach helped legitimize the action genre by demonstrating that these films could attract serious actors and explore meaningful themes while still delivering the spectacle that audiences expected. The Rambo franchise. The success of the casting choices in First Blood laid the foundation for the entire Rambo franchise. Stallone's embodiment of the character became so complete that it was impossible to imagine anyone else in the role, while Richard Crenna's Colonel Troutman became an essential part of the series' mythology. The franchise's success validated the original casting decisions and demonstrated the importance of finding the right actor for iconic roles. The fact that subsequent Rambo films continued to be successful, despite changes in directors and supporting cast, testified to the strength of Stallone's original interpretation of the character. Behind the scenes, the audition process. Sylvester Stallone screen test. While Stallone was already attached to the project as a co-writer, his casting as Rambo still required him to prove he could embody the character physically and emotionally. The screen tests focused on his ability to convey the character's vulnerability and trauma while also demonstrating the physical prowess necessary for the action sequences. Stallone's preparation for these screen tests included extensive research into the experiences of Vietnam veterans and the psychological effects of combat trauma. This preparation was evident in his ability to convey the character's internal struggles during the audition process. Supporting cast auditions. The audition process for the supporting roles in First Blood was extensive, with particular attention paid to finding actors who could convincingly portray their characters' regional backgrounds and professional roles. For law enforcement characters like Sheriff Teasle and Deputy Galt, auditions focused on the actor's ability to convey authority while also revealing their character's psychological motivations. Richard Crenna's audition for Colonel Troutman reportedly focused on his ability to convey both military authority and paternal concern. His extensive television and film experience gave him an advantage in demonstrating the range necessary for the role. Brian Dennehy's audition process involved demonstrating his ability to make Sheriff Teasle a complex antagonist rather than a simple villain. His theater background was crucial for this, as it had given him experience in creating fully realized characters with limited exposition. Technical considerations and casting. Physical requirements. The physical demands of First Blood were significant factors in the casting process. Actors needed to be capable of performing in challenging outdoor conditions, including sequences filmed in mountainous terrain and adverse weather conditions. Stallone's commitment to performing many of his own stunts was a crucial factor in his casting, as it allowed the film to maintain visual consistency in its action sequences. The physical preparation required for the role was extensive, including survival training and weapons handling. The supporting cast also faced physical challenges, particularly in scenes involving the manhunt sequences. Actors like Brian Dennehy needed to be capable of performing in outdoor conditions while maintaining their character's authority and competence. Age and experience considerations. The casting process needed to balance the characters' ages as written with the actors' abilities to handle the physical and emotional demands of their roles. Richard Crenna's age and experience were assets for the role of Colonel Troutman, as they helped to establish the character's authority and the believability of his relationship with Rambo. The decision to cast younger actors in some of the deputy roles helped establish the hierarchy within the sheriff's department while also providing opportunities for different approaches of the law enforcement characters. Cultural context and casting decisions. Vietnam War representation. The casting choices for First Blood were made within the cultural context of early 1980s America, when the Vietnam War was still a relatively recent and controversial topic. The film's approach to representing veterans required actors who could convey the complexity of the post-war experience without resorting to stereotypes. Stallone's portrayal of Rambo needed to balance the character's capabilities as a soldier with his struggles as a veteran trying to reintegrate into civilian society. This required an understanding of both the military experience and the civilian prejudices that veterans often faced. Small-town America. The casting of the various townspeople and law enforcement officers reflected the filmmaker's understanding of small-town American dynamics in the early 1980s. The actors chosen for these roles needed to convincingly portray the insularity and suspicion of outsiders that characterized many rural communities. This representation was crucial for the film's social commentary, as it needed to present these attitudes as believable rather than caricatured. The casting choices helped ground the film's social criticism in recognizable human behavior rather than obvious villainy. The international perspective global appeal. The casting decisions for First Blood were made with an awareness of the film's potential international appeal. Stallone's established international recognition from Rocky made him an attractive choice for global markets. While the universal themes of the film transcended specific American cultural references, the character archetypes represented in the film, the wronged veteran, the corrupt authority figure, the understanding mentor, had universal appeal that helped the film succeed in international markets. This success validated the casting choices and helped establish the Rambo character as a global icon. Cultural translation. The casting needed to support character types that could be understood across different cultures while still being specifically American in their details. The success of the film internationally demonstrated that the casting choices effectively balanced cultural specificity with universal appeal. Modern reassessment of casting choices. Contemporary perspective. Looking back at First Blood from a contemporary perspective, the casting choices remain impressive for their commitment to character development and psychological realism. The film's approach to casting serious actors in genre roles has become more common, but it was relatively unusual in 1982. The performances have aged well, with particular praise for the way the cast avoided the over-the-top approach that would characterize many 1980s action films. The restraint shown by the principal actors helped maintain the film's credibility as social commentary. Influence on modern casting. The casting strategy employed for First Blood can be seen as an influence on modern action films that prioritize character development alongside spectacle. Films that successfully balance action and character work often employ similar strategies of casting experienced actors in supporting roles while ensuring that the lead actor can handle both physical and emotional demands. Conclusion. The art of ensemble building. The casting of First Blood represents a masterclass in how thoughtful actor selection can elevate genre material beyond its apparent limitations. By prioritizing character authenticity over star power and supporting roles while ensuring that the lead actor could embody both the physical and psychological dimensions of the protagonist, the filmmakers created a template for intelligent action filmmaking. The success of these casting choices is evident not only in the film's commercial success but also in its lasting cultural impact. The characters created by these actors have become iconic, with John Rambo joining the ranks of memorable film characters who transcend their original narratives to become cultural symbols. The collaborative approach to casting, involving input from the director, writers, and lead actor, resulted in a cohesive ensemble that served the film's dual purpose as entertainment and social commentary. Each actor's contribution, from Stallone's physically and emotionally demanding lead performance to the character actors who brought the small-town setting to life, was essential for the film's overall success. Perhaps most importantly, the casting of First Blood demonstrated that action films could attract serious actors and explore meaningful themes without sacrificing the spectacle that audiences expected from the genre. This approach would influence countless subsequent films and help establish action cinema as a legitimate venue for exploring complex social and psychological themes. The legacy of First Blood's casting choices extends beyond the film itself to influence how modern filmmakers approach character development and genre films. The commitment to authenticity and psychological realism that guided the original casting decisions continues to serve as a model for filmmakers seeking to create action films with lasting impact and cultural relevance. In retrospect, The casting of First Blood was as crucial to its success as the action sequences, the direction, or the screenplay. The actors chosen for the film brought it a legitimacy and emotional weight that transformed what could have been a simple action film into a lasting piece of American cinema that continues to resonate with audiences more than 4 decades after its release. First Blood, 1982, a comprehensive analysis of the birth of an action icon. First Blood, released on October 22, 1982, stands as one of the most influential action films of the 1980s and perhaps one of the most misunderstood. Directed by Ted Koch and starring Sylvester Stallone as John Rambo, this film launched a franchise that would define action cinema for decades. However, the original First Blood was far darker, more introspective, and socially conscious than its sequels would suggest. This comprehensive analysis explores the extensive production journey, the challenges faced during filming, the post-production struggles, the musical contributions that elevated the material, and the film's remarkable commercial and critical reception that transformed it from a troubled production into a cultural phenomenon. Production development and pre-production. The journey of First Blood to the screen was a marathon spanning nearly a decade, filled with false starts, creative disputes, and numerous attempts by different studios and filmmakers to bring David Morrell's 1972 novel to life. The development history of First Blood reads like a case study in Hollywood's complex development process, showcasing how a single property can evolve dramatically as it passes through different hands. In 1972, Lawrence Turman at Columbia Pictures bought the film rights to First Blood for $175,000. This initial purchase marked the beginning of what would become a notoriously difficult adaptation process. Richard Brooks was slated to direct, and intended to have the film be an allegory on differing American perceptions of World War II and Vietnam War veterans, with Sheriff Teasdale portrayed more sympathetically than in the novel. Brooks' vision was ambitious and politically charged, reflecting the tumultuous period during which the Vietnam War was still ongoing. The film would have ended with Teasdale ordering his men to drop their guns to try to reason with Rambo, who would have then been fatally shot by an unknown assailant. Brooks planned to start shooting First Blood in New Mexico in December 1972. However, this version never materialized, as the film did not proceed because the Vietnam War was still underway and Brooks left the project. The political climate of the early 1970s made any Vietnam-related project controversial and potentially unmarketable. Studios were hesitant to tackle such sensitive material while the war was still raging and public opinion remained deeply divided. This hesitancy would plague the project for years to come. Following Brooks' departure, John Culley purchased the rights at Warner Brothers Pictures for $125,000 with the thought of casting either Robert De Niro or Clint Eastwood as Rambo. This represented a significant shift in approach, as both De Niro and Eastwood brought very different personas to their roles. De Niro, fresh from his collaborations with Martin Scorsese, would have brought his method acting intensity to the role, while Eastwood's man-with-no-name persona from his Western films could have given Rambo a more stoic, anti-heroic quality. A screenplay was written by Walter Newman with Martin Ritt intended to direct. The film would have criticized American military culture and portrayed Colonel Troutman as the film's villain, ending with both Rambo and Teasdale dying. This version would have been far more cynical and anti-establishment than the final film, reflecting the post-Watergate skepticism toward authority that characterized much of 1970s cinema. The decision to make Troutman a villain would have fundamentally altered the story's dynamics, removing the paternal figure who serves as Rambo's moral anchor in the final version. Sidney Pollack and Martin Bregman also considered directing the film, with Bregman hiring David Rabe to write a script. After Bregman departed, Mike Nichols considered directing Rabe's script. Each potential director brought their own vision to the project. Pollack, known for character-driven dramas like The Way We Were, would likely have emphasized the psychological aspects of Rambo's trauma. Bregman, a producer-turned-director, might have focused on the action elements. Nichols, with his background in comedy and social satire, could have brought a more satirical edge to the military and law enforcement critique. The breakthrough came when William Sackheim and Michael Kozol wrote the screenplay that would be the basis of the final film in 1977, originally intending for John Badham to direct. This screenplay would prove to be the foundation upon which all subsequent versions would be built. Sackheim and Kozol, both television veterans, understood the importance of character development and pacing that would translate well to the screen. Producer Carter DeHaven purchased Sackheim and Kozol's script from Warner Brothers for $375,000. DeHaven secured the Cinema Group as a financier and hired John Frankenheimer as director, with production to begin in Georgia. Frankenheimer, the director of classics like The Manchurian Candidate and 7 Days in May, would have brought a distinctly paranoid, thriller sensibility to the material. His background in political thrillers suggested he understood the broader implications of the Rambo story beyond simple action heroics. This was also the first version of the script in which Rambo survived the film. However, the project stalled again after the distributor Filmways was acquired by Orion Pictures. The decision to let Rambo survive was crucial, as it opened the door for potential sequels and allowed the character to serve as a symbol of survival rather than victimhood. The project's salvation came from an unexpected source. After Mario Kassar and Andrew G. Vine of Anabasis Investments read the book, they got interested in doing an adaptation as the first production of their studio Carolco Pictures, funded by in-house sources. They purchased the film rights from Warner Brothers for $375,000 and Sackheim and Kozol's script for $125,000 in 1981. Kassar and Vine represented a new breed of independent producers who were willing to take risks on material that major studios found too challenging or uncommercial. Ted Koch, who had been involved in the project in 1976, returned after Kassar and Vine offered to finance one of his projects. Koch offered the role of John Rambo to Sylvester Stallone, and the actor accepted after reading the script through in a weekend. Koch's return was significant because he had maintained an interest in the project for years and understood its potential. His decision to approach Stallone proved prescient, as the actor's involvement would be crucial to getting the film made. The casting process revealed the project's long and complicated history. Various scripts adapted from Morell's book had been pitched to studios in the years since its publication, but only Stallone's involvement prompted its production. The time since the end of the Vietnam War and Stallone's star power after the success of the Rocky films enabled him to rewrite the script to make the character of John Rambo more sympathetic. Stallone's success with the Rocky franchise gave him the clout to reshape the material according to his vision. One of the most significant changes Stallone made was to reduce the violence. Morell's book has Rambo kill many of his pursuers, and Kozol and Sackheim's draft had him killing 16 people, but in the movie Rambo does not directly cause the death of any police or National Guardsmen. This decision was crucial to making Rambo a sympathetic character rather than a homicidal maniac. By having Rambo avoid killing law enforcement officers, Stallone preserved the character's heroic qualities while still showcasing his formidable skills. Stallone also decided to let Rambo survive the film. Unlike in the book, a suicide scene was filmed, but Koch and Stallone opted to have Rambo turn himself in at Troutman's urging. The decision to film the suicide ending but ultimately reject it showed the filmmakers' uncertainty about the character's fate. The alternative ending where Rambo takes his own life would have been more in keeping with the novel's tragic vision, but would have prevented any possibility of sequels. Stallone did an estimated 7 revisions of the script. Koch requested further work be done on the script, which was performed by Larry Gross and David Giler. The multiple revisions reflected the ongoing struggle to balance the story's darker elements with commercial considerations. Each revision refined the character relationships and streamlined the narrative structure. The casting process for First Blood reads like a who's who of Hollywood talent, with numerous A-list actors considered for various roles throughout the project's development. Brooks originally wanted to cast Bette Davis as a psychiatrist and either Burt Lancaster or Lee Marvin as Sheriff Teasle. Davis's involvement would have added a psychiatric dimension to the story, potentially exploring Rambo's mental state in greater depth. Lancaster or Marvin as Teasle would have brought gravitas and military bearing to the sheriff character. When the project was purchased by Warner Brothers, Robert De Niro and Clint Eastwood were each considered for the role of Rambo. De Niro's method acting approach would have brought a more internal, psychological interpretation to Rambo, while Eastwood's stoic screen presence might have emphasized the character's survival skills over his emotional trauma. Ritt intended to cast Robert Mitchum as Teasle and Paul Newman as Rambo. Newman as Rambo would have been particularly intriguing, as his natural charisma and anti-establishment screen persona from films like Cool Hand Luke would have brought a different energy to the role. Mitchum's world-weary demeanor would have made for a more sympathetic Sheriff Teasle. Pollock considered Steve McQueen but then rejected him because they considered him too old to play a Vietnam veteran from 1975. McQueen's rejection due to age considerations highlighted one of the project's ongoing challenges: finding actors who could believably portray Vietnam veterans while still being bankable stars. James Caan, Burt Reynolds and Robert Redford were also considered. Each of these actors would have brought their own interpretation to Rambo. Caan's volatility might have emphasized the character's hair-trigger temper. Reynolds's charm could have made Rambo more likable, and Redford's all-American appeal might have heightened the tragedy of a decorated soldier being mistreated by his own society. One of the most intriguing near-misses was Al Pacino. Rabe developed his screenplay with Al Pacino in mind for the role and had several conversations with the actor, who wanted to portray Rambo as a force of nature after seeing the film Jaws. However, Pacino decided not to be involved because he found the story too dark, and also after his request that Rambo be a lunatic was dismissed by the producers. Pacino's interpretation of Rambo as an uncontrollable force of nature would have been radically different from Stallone's more human, sympathetic portrayal. The producers' rejection of his lunatic interpretation shows their commitment to maintaining Rambo's heroic qualities. When Badham was considered as director, he wanted to cast John Travolta as Rambo, George C. Scott as Troutman, and either Gene Hackman or Charles Durning as Teasle. Travolta as Rambo would have been a fascinating choice, potentially bringing more vulnerability and emotional openness to the role. Scott as Troutman would have added military authority and gravitas, while Hackman or Durning as Teasle would have brought different approaches to the antagonist role. Frankenheimer considered Powers Booth, Michael Douglas, and Nick Nolte as Rambo before casting Brad Davis because of his role in Midnight Express. Davis's casting was influenced by his powerful performance as an American imprisoned abroad, suggesting Frankenheimer saw parallels between that character's ordeal and Rambo's struggles. Dustin Hoffman was offered the role of Rambo but turned it down. Hoffman's rejection was likely due to his preference for more character-driven, less action-oriented material. The casting of Sheriff Teasle proved equally challenging. For the role of Sheriff Teasle, Kasser and Vanna approached Academy Award winners Hackman and Robert Duvall but both turned the part down. The rejection by such prestigious actors suggested the role was seen as either unsympathetic or underdeveloped in early script versions. The most dramatic casting change involved Colonel Troutman. James Mason and Richard Yekel were also considered. Kirk Douglas was eventually hired, but just before shooting began, Douglas quit the role of Colonel Troutman over a script dispute. Douglas wanted to retain the novel's original ending of Rambo and Teasle fatally wounding each other, Troutman finishing Rambo with a kill shot, then sitting with the dying Teasle for the sheriff's final moments. Douglas also wanted Troutman to have more screen time. Douglas's departure was a significant blow, as his star power and dramatic gravitas would have added considerable weight to the film. His preference for the novel's darker ending reflected his comfort with morally complex material. Rock Hudson was approached as a replacement but was soon to undergo heart surgery and had to pass up the chance to work with Stallone. Hudson's unavailability led to what would become one of the film's most fortuitous casting decisions. Richard Crenna was quickly hired as a replacement. The role of Troutman became the veteran character actor's most famous role, a performance for which he received much critical praise. Crenna's casting proved to be perfect, as his authoritative yet compassionate portrayal of Troutman provided the emotional anchor the film needed. Filming the film was shot in the Fraser Valley of British Columbia on a $15 million budget beginning on November 15, 1981, and continuing until April 1982. The choice of British Columbia as a filming location was both practical and aesthetic. The province offered substantial cost savings compared to shooting in the United States, while its rugged wilderness provided the perfect backdrop for Rambo's survival ordeal. The town scenes in the movie were shot in Hope and the nearby Coquella Canyon Provincial Park, called Chapman Gorge in this film, while the rest of the movie was shot in Capilano Canyon, Golden Ears Provincial Park and Pitt Lake and Pitt Meadows. These locations were chosen for their authenticity and dramatic visual impact. Hope, a small town in British Columbia, perfectly embodied the fictional town where Rambo faces persecution. The various wilderness locations provided the diverse terrain needed for the extensive chase and survival sequences. The production faced numerous challenges from the outset. During the production, Buzz Ftchens replaced producer Red Carlin, who suffered a heart attack. This early personnel change could have destabilized the production, but Ftchens, an experienced producer who had worked on several major action films, stepped in to maintain continuity. Weather proved to be one of the production's biggest obstacles. The locations chosen for the film initially experienced unseasonably warm and sunny weather during the filming, which posed challenges since the crew had counted on an overcast setting. The film's tone and visual aesthetic depended heavily on creating oppressive, threatening atmosphere, which bright sunshine undermined. However, a period of heavy snowfall beginning in January 1982 delayed the production by 2 months. While the snow provided the atmospheric conditions the filmmakers wanted, it created logistical nightmares for the crew and significantly impacted the shooting schedule. The physical demands of the production took their toll on the cast, particularly Stallone. Other delays were caused by injuries to the cast during stunts, including Stallone sustaining a serious back injury and several broken ribs. In particular, due to performing his own stunt of dropping off a cliff and into a tree. Stallone's commitment to performing his own stunts added authenticity to the action sequences but came at considerable personal cost. His injuries were serious enough to cause production delays, but his dedication to the physicality of the role contributed significantly to the film's credibility. The production faced unique logistical challenges due to the Canadian location. The firearms used in this film had to be imported into Canada because of the country's firearms regulation. This requirement added complexity and expense to the production, as each weapon had to be properly documented and transported across international borders. A serious security incident occurred during filming that highlighted the realistic nature of the weapons being used. In January 1982, over $50,000 worth of firearms, including 14 M16 rifles, 3 Remington shotguns, 2.44 Magnum revolvers, and 11 Colt AR-15 rifles were stolen from the set. Although the guns had been modified to shoot blanks, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police claimed that they could be easily modified to fire live ammunition. This theft represented not just a financial loss but a potential public safety threat, as the stolen weapons could potentially be converted back to lethal functionality. After the incident, the set was guarded by the Canadian Army, whose soldiers also served as extras in the film. The military presence added an extra layer of authenticity to the film's National Guard scenes, as real soldiers were used alongside professional actors. This arrangement also provided enhanced security for the remaining weapons and equipment. The extended production schedule created additional financial pressures. Since the production ran over schedule, Crenna's role in the film was cut in order to avoid having to pay him higher fees as specified in his contract. This budget-driven decision had narrative implications, as Troutman's reduced screen time affected the character's development and his relationship with Rambo. Despite the cuts, Crenna's performance remained one of the film's strongest elements. Post-production. The post-production phase of First Blood proved to be as challenging as the filming itself, with the creative team struggling to shape the massive amount of footage into a coherent narrative. The first rough cut of this film was between 3 and 3.5 hours long. This initial assembly represented the filmmaker's comprehensive vision but was clearly far too long for commercial release. According to Sylvester Stallone, It was so bad that it sickened his agent and him. Stallone wanted to buy the movie and destroy it, thinking that it was a career killer. Stallone's extreme reaction to the early cut reveals how different the film was from his original vision. The star's willingness to purchase and destroy the film shows how concerned he was about its potential impact on his career. This reaction also suggests that the initial cut may have been much darker and more violent than the final version. The editing process was extensive and transformative. After heavy re-editing, the film was cut down to 93 minutes. This version was ultimately released in theaters. Reducing a 3.5-hour film to 93 minutes required eliminating vast amounts of footage, including character development, action sequences, and plot elements. This aggressive editing created a much tighter, more commercially viable film, but likely sacrificed some of the story's depth and complexity. The ending proved particularly problematic and required reshooting. The ending used in the finished film was shot in March 1982, after the original one was deemed unsatisfactory. The fact that the ending required reshooting months after principal photography wrap indicates serious concerns about the film's conclusion. The original ending, where Rambo commits suicide, was more faithful to the novel but was ultimately rejected in favor of the more hopeful ending where he surrenders. Distribution presented another challenge for the independent production. Kasser and Vida sought either Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox or Paramount Pictures as a distributor, displaying an 18-minute promotional reel to studios. The promotional reel represented the producer's attempt to sell the film based on its action sequences and star power rather than its dapper themes. Although they secured international distributors, they were unable to locate a domestic distributor to the film until they sent a longer 55-minute reel to the American film market. The longer reel presumably provided more context and character development, convincing distributors of the film's commercial potential. After Warner Brothers and Paramount expressed interest, Orion Pictures agreed to the domestic distribution of the film. Orion's agreement to distribute the film was crucial to its success, as the company had experience with both commercial and artistic films, making them an ideal partner for First Blood's unique blend of action and social commentary. Music. The musical score for First Blood proved to be one of its most memorable and influential elements, creating an emotional depth that elevated the material beyond typical action fare. The film's score was composed and conducted by Jerry Goldsmith, whose theme "It's a Long Road" added a new dimension to the character, and featured in the film's 3 sequels and animated spin-off. Goldsmith's involvement was crucial to the film's success, as his score provided the emotional backbone that the story required. Jerry Goldsmith was already an established master of film composition, known for his innovative and emotionally powerful scores for films like Planet of the Apes, Chinatown, and Alien. His approach to First Blood was both subtle and powerful, using orchestral arrangements to convey Rambo's internal struggles and the broader themes of alienation and survival. The main theme, "It's a Long Road," became synonymous with the Rambo character and franchise. The song, with its melancholy melody and introspective lyrics, captured the essence of Rambo's journey from decorated soldier to misunderstood outcast. The theme's enduring popularity is evidenced by its continued use throughout the franchise and its recognition by fans as one of the greatest action movie themes. The soundtrack was originally released on LP by the Regency label, although it was edited out of sequence for a more satisfying listen. The decision to resequence the music for the album release was common practice, allowing the music to flow better as a standalone listening experience rather than following the film's narrative structure. The album was reissued on CD with one extra track, "No Power," twice, first as one of Entrada Records' initial titles, then as an identical release by Varietilde di RSS Saraband. The multiple reissues demonstrated the enduring popularity of Goldsmith's score and the demand from collectors and fans for high-quality versions of the music. The complete score release provided fans and film music enthusiasts with a comprehensive look at Goldsmith's work. The complete score was released by Entrada in a 2-CD set, along with the remastered version of the original album, with the Coralco logo previously released on La La Land Records' Extreme Prejudice album and the Rambo, First Blood Part 2 trailer music added, on November 23, 2010, as one of their MOF Unlimited titles. This expanded release, allowed listeners to experience the full range of Goldsmith's composition, including cues that were edited or unused in the final film. The track listing reveals the scope of Goldsmith's musical storytelling. Key pieces like Homecoming, My Town, Under Arrest, and The Razor trace Rambo's emotional journey from his arrival in Hope through his escalating conflict with local authorities. Action cues like Mountain Hunt, First Blood, and The Truck provide dynamic musical accompaniment to the film's chase and combat sequences, while pieces like No Power, Night Attack and Hide and Seek create tension and suspense. The inclusion of both instrumental and vocal versions of It's a Long Road on the soundtrack allowed the theme to work both within the film's narrative and as a standalone song. The vocal version, performed by Dan Hill, brought additional emotional weight to the theme's lyrics, which dealt directly with the experiences of Vietnam veterans returning to an unwelcoming society. Released theatrical. First Blood's theatrical release marked the culmination of years of development struggles and production challenges. First Blood was released in the United States on October 22, 1982. The October release date positioned the film for the lucrative fall movie season, avoiding the summer blockbuster competition while capitalizing on audiences looking for dramatic entertainment. As the year progressed, the film's marketing campaign emphasized its action elements while also highlighting the dramatic themes that set it apart from typical action fare. The promotional materials featured Stallone in his iconic headband and combat gear, establishing the visual iconography that would define the character for decades. The tagline and advertising copy emphasized Rambo's status as a decorated war hero facing persecution, framing the story as a tale of injustice rather than simple violence. First Blood topped the U.S. box office for 3 weeks in a row, and its $6,642,005 opening weekend was the best October opening at the time. The film's immediate box office success exceeded expectations, demonstrating that audiences were ready for its unique blend of action and social commentary. The 3-week run at #1 was particularly impressive, showing the film had strong word-of-mouth appeal beyond its opening weekend. The film's performance established several box office records and milestones. The film ended as a significant financial success, with a total gross of $64 million domestically, the highest-grossing film of the fall, and the 13th highest-grossing film of the year. These impressive numbers position First Blood among the year's major hits, competing successfully against films like E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Tootsie, and Gandhi. The international box office performance was even more remarkable. The film grossed $160.3 million worldwide, against a $15 million budget. This represented more than a tenfold return on investment, making First Blood one of the most profitable films of 1982. The strong international performance suggested that the film's themes of individual versus authority resonated with audiences worldwide. One of the most significant aspects of First Blood's release was its eventual distribution in China. It was notably the first major Hollywood blockbuster to be released in China, where it was released in 1985. This historic distinction came during a period when China was beginning to open its markets to Western entertainment, making First Blood a cultural ambassador as well as a commercial success. It sold 76 million tickets in China, the highest for a foreign Hollywood film up until 2018. This extraordinary figure demonstrates the film's massive popularity in China, where audiences apparently connected strongly with the story of an individual fighting against overwhelming odds. The record stood for over 3 decades, testament to the film's unique appeal and the enduring popularity of the Rambo character in international markets. Home media. The home video release of First Blood extended its commercial success and allowed for deeper exploration of the film's creation through special features and commentary tracks. The film's transition to home video formats provided opportunities for fans to revisit the film and for new audiences to discover it outside of theatrical screenings. Author Morell recorded an audio commentary track for the First Blood Special Edition DVD released in 2002. Morell's commentary provided unique insights into the source material and the adaptation process, offering fans the perspective of the novel's creator on how his work was transformed for the screen. His participation also demonstrated the continued relevance and interest in this film 20 years after its initial release. Actor Stallone recorded an audio commentary track for the First Blood Ultimate Edition DVD released in 2004. Stallone's commentary offered fans insights into his creative process, the physical demands of the role, and his vision for the character. As both star and co-writer, Stallone provided a comprehensive perspective on the film's development and production. This edition also includes a never-before-seen alternate ending in which Rambo commits suicide via a fate more in line with the original novel's ending and a humorous ending tacked on afterwards. The inclusion of the alternate suicide ending allowed fans to see the darker conclusion that was filmed but ultimately rejected. This ending provided insight into the filmmaker's original intentions and the novel's more tragic vision of Rambo's fate. A brief snippet of the suicide ending appears in a flashback in the fourth movie. This reference in the later sequel demonstrated the continued relevance of the alternate ending and provided continuity for fans familiar with the deleted sequence. Lionsgate also released this version on Blu-ray. Both commentary tracks are on the Blu-ray release. The high-definition release allowed fans to experience the film with enhanced visual and audio quality while maintaining access to the valuable commentary tracks from both Morel and Stallone. International home video releases provided additional options for fans. Momentum Pictures released an HD DVD version of First Blood in the United Kingdom in April 2007. The HD DVD format, though ultimately unsuccessful in the marketplace, provided superior picture quality for early adopters of high-definition technology. Lionsgate also released First Blood as a double feature on February 13, 2007, along with 2004's The Punisher. The pairing with The Punisher suggested marketing the films as a package of vigilante, anti-hero action films, appealing to fans of morally complex protagonists. The franchise approach to home video marketing culminated in a comprehensive box set release. The film was re-released as part of a 6-disc box set, which contains all 4 films in the series, on May 27, 2008. This collection allowed fans to own the entire Rambo saga in one package, providing context for the original film within the larger franchise narrative. However, the box set had some technical issues. The box set is missing the David Morrell commentary, even though the packaging clearly states it is included. This omission disappointed fans who specifically purchased the set expecting to access Morrell's insights about the adaptation of his novel. In anticipation of the release, the film was shown back in theaters for one night, May 15, 2008. Through Fathom Events, the alternate ending was shown after the main feature. This special theatrical presentation allowed fans to experience the film on the big screen again while also seeing the rarely viewed alternate ending in a theatrical setting. The most recent home video release brought the film into the ultra-high-definition era. First Blood was released on 4K UHD Blu-ray on November 9, 2018. The 4K release provided the highest quality home viewing experience available, allowing fans to see the film's cinematography and special effects with unprecedented clarity and detail. Reception box office. First Blood's box office performance exceeded all expectations and established it as one of 1982's major commercial successes. The film's financial achievements were particularly impressive given its relatively modest budget and the fact that it was produced by the independent Garalco Pictures rather than a major studio. First Blood topped the U.S. box office for 3 weeks in a row, and its $6,642,005 opening weekend was the best October opening at the time. The film's immediate box office dominance demonstrated strong audience appeal from the moment it opened. The 3-week reign at the top of the box office was particularly significant, showing that the film had strong legs. The ability to retain audiences beyond the opening weekend through positive word of mouth. Review.one pulled out of jail by his former commanding officer, John Rambo, is sent on a mission to go back in Vietnam and survey where American POWs are still being held captive. But incensed with their treatment, Rambo teams up with the female freedom fighter to rescue them firsthand. While First Blood, this film's predecessor, can still be held up as a sharp thriller of dislocated souls in the heart of America. Its sequel is a comic book aberration whose pounding lack of political judgment has lent it a hilariously un-PC quality, and a fond place in people's heart it surely doesn't deserve. This is a film co-written by Sylvester Stallone and James Cameron, and is accordingly dementedly macho, a right-wing wet dream of righteous American annihilation, as this walking walnut with a noble heart, played with Stallone's particular stroke victim clarity, returns to win the Vietnam War single-handedly. On that level it's a fascinating piece, an inflamed representation of how so many Americans cannot face up to their great historical failure. As a film it's too easily mocked for its unironic transformation of the battered soul of John Rambo, Stallone's second righteous thicko after Rocky, into an indestructible superhero, who crudely burbles the film's cranky hypothesis. Do we get to win this time? The action is equally crude and sadomasochistic. While there's plenty of scenes of Rambo mowing down cannon fodder gooks, he also partakes in a grueling torture scene when the Russians turn up, led by indefatigable Soviet for-hire Steven Burkov. Things have so slipped into some netherworld of hideous small-mindedness. The only response is gales of appropriate laughter. Rambo asks a lot of us. It's a real test. Here is a film fully xenophobic, abhorrent film, touting a lawless version of military honor, but with Jack Cardiff's furtive camera work and some excellent editing, it sucks you into its disturbing heroic sweep. But that doesn't count as a recommendation. Reappraisal is not due. A favorite of those adolescent enough in the 80s to enjoy its macho, right-wing cliches with no qualms. Review.to speak the name Rambo, and a few choice images pop into your mind, each related by blood and by excess, men's throats torn out barehanded, companies of soldiers reduced to carmine mist courtesy of an M2 Browning machine gun, tanks driven into helicopters, gunboats blown sky-high by a well-placed RPG shot. You think first of brawn, you think of badassery. You don't, most likely, think of bitterness, or bleakness, or the unknowable and crippling sense of isolation too many soldiers experience on returning to civilian life after serving in combat. That's partly on you. It's also partly on, well, the Rambo movies that aren't 1982's Rambo, First Blood. 36 years have passed since the cardinal chapter in the Rambo franchise opened in theaters, since Sylvester Stallone first introduced the movie version of David Morrell's haunted Vietnam War vet to audiences across the world, since John Rambo became synonymous with muscle-headed, brain-dead action. Charting the course the series took after First Blood, and ignoring First Blood pretty much across the board, the relationships between Rambo's name and violent raw machismo make sense with a bit of credit given to Rambo, First Blood Part 2. Which at least tries to acknowledge the character's painful backstory. Everything after First Blood devolves from character study and anti-war critique to a non-stop montage of explosions, gunfire, dudes getting arrowed, more explosions and manly grunting, all buttressed by guts and arterial spray. A shame that the good news, at least, is that Lionsgate's 4K Ultra HD release for First Blood, which hit this week, gives viewers opportunity to revisit the movie 10 years after the franchise's last update, Rambo, and just over a year ahead of its next, Rambo v. Last Blood, dropping in September of 2019. There's violence here, too, and of course, there's a bit of viscera, but more than anything else there's heartache and anger, two things mostly absent from the films that followed in its wake. Not that there isn't a certain pleasure in watching Stallone fully embrace Rambo as an unstoppable killing machine capable of leveling armies all by himself. Of course Rambo isn't exactly a smart film, but it's certainly an entertaining film, assuming you like your action over the top and completely apathetic about optics. First Blood, in comparison to 1985's Rambo, First Blood Part 2, 1988's Rambo 3, and 2008's Rambo, and, at least according to early images of Stallone dressed for the Dude Ranch, Rambo v. Last Blood, looks like an Oscar movie, a story built on the foundation of genre but concerned with ideas and themes that marry well to its genre of choice. Yes, Ted Koch's film lets Rambo go. Well, Rambo, sneaking about through the woods of Washington state, dispatching hapless lawmen hot on his trail. Yes, he sets up traps that even the predator would gaze on in admiration. Yes, he's a one-man wrecking crew trained to take out enemies beyond count and improvise supplies with scraps and detritus found in the belly of a mineshaft. But even with Rambo at his most superpowered, Kochfei working from Morell's blueprint and from the screenplay cobbled together by William Sakai, Michael Coslin Stallone himself ensures that he remains at all times simply, and dolefully, human. Rambo doesn't want to fight, he doesn't want trouble. Maybe, if you read the franchise closely enough, that concept carries through even to Rambo 08's absolutely bonkers climax. But First Blood never forces its audience to parse out the message because the message is the soul of the movie. Rambo's wandering the United States 7 years after being discharged from the army, searching for one of his buddies, a member of his old unit. His travels take him to the Evergreen State, where he's told that his friend died of cancer via Agent Orange exposure in Nam. Once a part of a collective, Rambo, mere minutes into First Blood, finds himself utterly alone, which makes his treatment at the hands of Sheriff Teasle, Brian Dennehy, all the more appalling. Teasle mistakes Rambo for a drifter and literally drives him out of town. All Rambo wants is a bite to eat, maybe a place to rest. After putting his life on the line for the country, even in a war as corrupt as Vietnam, food and shelter seems little to ask. But this is the United States, a land of performative patriotism, where we love our troops when they're at war and willfully neglect them when they come back home in one piece. Teasle's a tough guy. He's not about to be out-toughed by a shaggy-haired vagrant, no matter that he's a decorated war hero. It's bad enough to wake up one morning to find that you're the last of your former military unit, and worse still to return from Vietnam only for hippies and activists to spit on you and call you baby killer. But the greatest ignominy of all may be finding that even the law of your land doesn't care about you, and in fact considers you a stain on the country you fought for. First Blood isn't about a beefy rebel kicking indiscriminate ass. It's about a man bereft of everything, right down to his dignity, by the government he trained to serve. Ultimately, it's a tragedy first and a spectacle second, and the film demands more respect for it. For prestige and respectability, Stallone has chapter in the Rocky franchise, being, of course, Rocky, Rocky Balboa and Creed, and, perhaps, Creed 2, which opens just before Thanksgiving. But First Blood demands the same respectability for its defiance of convention and the strength of its conviction. It's a protest film that packages its dissent within the comfortably straightforward structure of its genre. Review. 3 Director Jalmari Hollander, Sisu, may have found his leading man for the upcoming John Rambo prequel. According to Deadline, Noah Centineo, the recruit, is in talks to star as a young Rambo in the action film. Plot details are being kept under wraps, but John Rambo will center on the character's youth as a Green Beret recruit during the Vietnam War, exploring his experiences in the war and the trauma that set him on his path in the original First Blood film, where he was played by Sylvester Stallone. Rambo has been one of the most iconic action heroes in cinema, first debuting in the First Blood novel by David Morrell and having 5 films, all starring Stallone, developed since 1982. John Rambo will mark the 6th feature film in the franchise from a script written by Rory Haynes and Sahrab Nashivani. John Rambo will begin production in Thailand in early 2026. It will be produced by Millennium Media and likely Lionsgate after the latter studio produced 2008's Rambo and 2019's Rambo: Last Blood. Centineo is known for roles in various young adult series such as The Fosters and the To All the Boys I've Loved trilogy, but has been starring in more action and dramatic-oriented productions with Netflix's The Recruit, A24's Warfare and the upcoming Street Fighter live-action film. Review. 3 Sylvester Stallone returns to Cannes to present an exclusive look at images from Rambo v. Last Blood, which will be released in theaters in the fall of 2019. It all started in 1982 with the first opus of the saga, Rambo: First Blood. Sylvester Stallone plays John Rambo, one of the most famous movie characters in recent years. The world premiere of this film in its restored version will be screened in the Grand Th. Copyright A. Sanstre Lumai Diaresis Re. The American actor will also look back on his career in an interview during the event, with his 1976 cult film Rocky, for which he wrote the script himself. Actor and bodybuilding enthusiast Sylvester Stallone rose to the rank of international star. His Italian-American character returned in the film's first sequel in 1979, and it was only a few months after the release of Rocky III, in 1982, that Rambo: First Blood, directed by Ted Koch, hit the theaters. Adapted from a novel, this feature film follows the story of John Rambo, a Vietnam War hero who wanders from town to town seeking out old war buddies. When he is arrested for vagrancy, Rambo is thrown in jail and mistreated by abusive police officers. Becoming enraged, he escapes into the forest after injuring numerous officers, and the manhunt begins. The story of Rambo: First Blood inspired traumatized American veterans who, after their defeat in Vietnam, were faced with numerous difficulties readjusting to American society. As in Rocky, Sylvester Stallone impressed the audiences of Rambo: First Blood with action and combat scenes that helped him get his nickname Sly. He is one of the few actors who has played the role of two internationally known action film heroes. Restoration of the Rambo trilogy was performed by Technicolor Hollywood from the camera negatives, digitized in 16-bit 4K resolution, as well as by Étoile de Claire in Paris. The color grading was performed for movie theaters in HDR Dolby Vision. The film was restored image by image in accordance with the artistic decisions made during its original production. Review. For Carl takes a retrospective look at Sylvester Stallone's superb Rambo sequel. 1985 was the summer of Rambo. Has it really been 35 years since Sylvester Stallone unleashed Rambo on the world for the second time? I remember the film and the trouble I had actually getting into a cinema to actually see it so well. The film had opened in the US and stormed the box office there before finally making its way to the United Kingdom. I expected the film to be popular after the enjoyment people got out of the original A First Blood back in 1982. However, it took 4 attempts for me to catch the all-action sequel. Every time I tried to go and see the movie, it was sold out. These were the days when you couldn't book your seat in advance unless you were going to see a film in London's West End. You took your chances of getting in. If you managed to get in, great, enjoy the movie. If you didn't, then tough luck and better luck next time. After failing with my first 3 attempts to secure a seat, I was starting to fear that I would have to wait for the inevitable VHS release, and take my chances in managing to rent a copy of it once it emerged. But I decided to try just one more time before giving up. This time, I arrived an hour early and got myself at the front of the queue. People tried to jump to the front, but a few choice, and I admit, foul words of the 4-letter variety, were uttered from my mouth. I got my seat, and finally managed to see the film I had heard so much about. Was it worth all the hassle of getting myself in to see it? Are you kidding? It was a brilliant experience. Although the film gained mixed reviews upon release, audiences around the world lapped it up in droves. Okay, it is pretty cartoonish at times, and that final Rambo monologue at the end is a piece of cringeworthy flag-waving nonsense that, although I can see what Stallone was trying to portray and commend him for the attempt, comes off as unintentionally funny. But despite its flaws that I have noticed over the years, it is still one of the best action films to emerge from the 1980s. And every time it is shown on TV, whether it's free to air or on subscription services, I'm there, parked in front of the screen, and no one is allowed to distract me while Rambo is doing his thing. I guess it's an age thing in reality, but it still appeals to me to this day. I've got the entire franchise on Blu-ray and DVD many times over, but the second film is the one I'll reach for if I need to drift away for 90 minutes. The screenplay is credited to have been written by Stallone and James Cameron. Yes, that James Cameron. Cameron wrote the first draft of the film called A First Blood 2, The Mission. In his version, Rambo had a partner for the mission to rescue POWs in Vietnam, with John Travolta initially considered for the role. However, Stallone rejected the idea. disliking the notion of a tetchy sidekick. He was also unimpressed with Cameron's screenplay, which took nearly 40 pages to introduce action and mirrored the structure of the first film. Along with the returning Stallone, actor Richard Crenna reprised his role as Colonel Sam Troutman from the first film, but it was the casting that didn't come off which would have raised the most eyebrows. When the original A First Blood was being cast, the producers approached the legendary actor Lee Marvin to play the role of Troutman, which he turned down. During the casting for the second film, Marvin was approached to play the slick Major Marshal Roger Murdoch. It would have been interesting to see Marvin in the franchise he turned down 3 years earlier, but once again, he declined the opportunity, and the role went to Charles Napier. Napier played Murdoch well, balancing charm and a slimy bureaucrat persona, though it's hard not to wonder how Marvin would have handled the role. The film was shot in Thailand and Guerrero, Mexico, between June and August of 1984. The filming didn't go off without tragedy, however, as the special effects wizard, Clifford P. Wenger Jr., was tragically killed when one of the film's many explosions went wrong. The film had a production cost of $25.5 million and grossed $300.4 million worldwide, including $150.4 million in the US and Canada. It premiered on May 22, 1985, in 2,074 theaters and topped the box office in its opening weekend, earning $20.2 million. With the brilliant score by Jerry Goldsmith, who returned to the franchise, the film captures the essence of action while revisiting themes from First Blood. It stands out to fans of Sylvester Stallone and the action genre. Notably, President Ronald Reagan remarked after seeing it, "At least I know to descend next time," adding to its acclaim. Set 3 years after the events of A First Blood. The film opens with Rambo in prison, serving an 8-year sentence for his actions in Hope, Washington. He is visited by his former commanding officer, Colonel Sam Troutman, with an offer. Rambo accepts a covert mission in Vietnam to locate American POWs, which could lead to a presidential pardon. He feels strongly about the mission, especially since it involves the same camp from which he escaped as a POW, so he decides to proceed. After meeting the Special Ops designate, Marshal Roger Murdoch, who is running the operation, and getting all the details he needs, along with weapons and equipment, Rambo parachutes into the Vietnamese jungle. But not before a near-fatal accident when he jumps from the plane and almost kills him, losing most of his equipment in the process. Meeting up with his guide, C.O. Bao, she takes him along the river to the camp via river pirates. The camp is supposed to be empty. Rambo is shocked to find that Vietnamese forces occupy the area and are holding several POWs inside. Rambo cannot stand idly by while his fellow countrymen are being held prisoner. He breaks into the camp, rescuing one prisoner who is tied to a bamboo cross. As they make their escape, Rambo is forced to kill 3 of the soldiers he encounters, including one who discovers CO and is about to execute her. The next morning, after the discovery of the dead bodies, Lieutenant A. George Chung, the soldier who tortured Rambo years ago, leads his men to find Rambo, Cope, and the escaped prisoner, Banks. The trio make their way back to the river pirates and makes their escape. However, the pirates have sold them out, brutally killing the pirates. Rambo has CO and Banks leap into the water. He destroys a gunboat that is approaching them to take them prisoner with an RPG. Rambo himself makes his escape and, along with Banks, heads to the extraction site where he is due to be picked up. However, Tay has tracked Rambo to the site, and he has his men launch grenades at the escaping pair. Rambo's rescue helicopter, with Troutman aboard at first, aids Rambo in his defense against the soldiers. But Murdoch, discovering Rambo has broken his orders and has an actual POW with him, orders the chopper to abort the pickup, fearing reprisals if a POW actually returns with news that they have been abandoned by their government, who know they are still alive and being held, thus saving Congress money. Rambo and Banks are captured. Rambo is interrogated and tortured by Russian forces led by Lieutenant Colonel Podovsky, Stephen Burkov. He is among those training the Vietnamese forces. After being forced to contact his home base, and threatening to come and get Murdoch for his betrayal, Rambo makes a violent escape along with company. The plan is to cross the border into Thailand and return home. He promises to take CO with him, but Tay has tracked them down and opens fire, killing company. Rambo buries her in the jungle and then seeks violent revenge against the Soviets and the Vietnamese, aiming to escape and rescue the POWs before confronting Murdoch. All of this is packed into 96 minutes of bullet-ridden, bloodthirsty, violent, and explosive mayhem. The film is dated somewhat now, of course. Even Rambo utters that the year is 1985 during proceedings. However, the film still lives on and remains a favorite among action film fans. It's the first film I rented on VHS that I watched, rewound, and watched again all day. Although it isn't my most watched film, it definitely ranks in my top 5, and it continues to play in my home every month at least. It's the perfect popcorn movie to watch late at night with a refreshing beverage, some snacks, and the lights off and no distractions. The original A Die Hard followed in the same vein 3 years later, a film that, no matter how many times you sit and watch it, you're guaranteed a good night's entertainment. But Rambo, First Blood Part I got there first, and now, 35 years later, it still feels good to find out hey I'm coming to get you. Introducing Carl. As the news editor at Future of the Force, Carl has been an invaluable member of our team since early 2016. His expertise and dedication have made him an integral part of our editorial staff. Beyond his professional role, Carl is a fervent supporter of Liverpool FC and an avid follower of pop culture. He has a deep passion for Halloween, Friday the 13th, and the iconic movie franchises Star Wars and Star Trek. He can be found either at his neighborhood cinema, enjoying the latest releases on the big screen, or at home streaming the newest blockbuster movies. Review. 5 John Rambo drew first blood in the 1982 hit that starred Sylvester Stallone in his inaugural appearance as a Vietnam War veteran turned one-man army. But it was the sequel, Rambo, First Blood Part 2, that really set the tone for how the franchise is remembered. Blasting into theaters on Memorial Day weekend in 1985, Rambo transformed the title character from a troubled loner into the ultimate American warrior, one who was immediately embraced by both moviegoers, the military and the commander-in-chief. Now we see a Rambo that's more confident, Stallone said of the sequel's appeal in a 2002 DVD featurette. A Rambo hell-bent on rewriting his own history. Now he gets a chance, which is something a lot of people don't in life. It's redemption. Where First Blood took place on American soil, First Blood Part 2 moves the action to the jungles of Vietnam, where Rambo is tasked with locating long-missing prisoners of war. And once he's back in the country, Rambo turns his covert mission into a full-fledged war, battling both Vietnamese and Russian soldiers, as well as American bureaucrats, as represented by Charles Napier's CIA agent, Roger Murdoch, who would prefer to let the past die. Released a full decade after the last American helicopter departed Saigon, not to mention during the height of 1980s Cold War tensions, the movie imagines a wish-fulfillment scenario that Rambo handily summarizes in the first scene. Do we get to win this time? That question propelled First Blood Part 2 to a $300 million global gross, as well as an unlikely animated series, multiple rip-offs and 3 sequels, 1988's Rambo 3, 2008's Rambo and 2019's Rambo, Last Blood, none of which matched the box office firepower of the second installment. 35 years later, here are 5 things you probably didn't know about one of the defining action movies of the 1980s. James Cameron wrote the first draft of the screenplay. There would never have been a First Blood Part 2 if First Blood had stuck with its original ending. Director Ted Koch intended to hew closer to the downbeat finale of David Morrell's 1972 novel, where Rambo dies after fighting the police force of a small Washington town. As scripted and shot, the wounded veteran is visited by his former commanding officer, Sam Troutman, Richard Crenna, and essentially commits suicide by grabbing the colonel's gun. It was incredibly moving, Koch told Entertainment Weekly in 2017. But, Sylvester got up and said, "Hey Ted, can I talk to you for a second?" He said, "You know, Ted, we put this character through so much a broken bar all this, and now we're gonna kill him?" so the director and star quickly filmed an alternate version where Rambo lives to fight another day. A fortuitous decision, as test audiences unanimously rejected the darker ending. Unhappy endings are intellectual endings, Koch remarked in his YouTube interview, but happy endings are popular endings. To which I might add, for Andy Vina and Mario Kassar, who produced 3 Rambo sequels, profitable endings, too. Once the box office grosses for First Blood rolled in, Vina and Kassar wasted little time commissioning a second installment from an up-and-coming screenwriter and director, James Cameron. At the time, Cameron had recently completed his directorial debut, Piranha 2, The Spawning, and was trying to raise funds to make his own 80s action classic, The Terminator. In December 1983, a little over a year after First Blood hit theaters, he delivered his script to Vina and Kassar, entitled First Blood 2, The Mission. In a notable departure from the theatrical film, Cameron's script opens in a mental institution where Rambo has been confined since the events of the first movie. Having shown up to recruit his top soldier to participate in the POW mission, Troutman finds Rambo in extreme isolation and treated with a mixture of fear and loathing by the security staff. A broken bar, not unlike Sarah Connor's introduction in Terminator 2, Judgment Day. Once Cameron submitted his draft, Stallone took over scripting duties and wrote the version that went before cameras in June 1984. According to The Hollywood Legend, though, Cameron's script circulated beyond the Rambo production offices. The Chuck Norris star vehicle, Missing in Action, which is also about a Vietnam veteran on a bloody mission to find POWs, was rumored to have been inspired by the mission and actually beat First Blood Part 2 to theaters. Missing in Action opened in November 1984. 1 month after The Terminator blew moviegoers away and ensured that Cameron never had to write work-for-hire sequel scripts again. John Travolta was going to be Rambo's wisecracking sidekick. Stallone's rewrite of Cameron's script stuck to the same Rambo on a mission outline, but with some key alterations. The biggest change between versions is the elimination of the movie's co-lead, Lieutenant Brewer, who Cameron created to serve as Rambo's sidekick in the field and also be the modern counterpart to his old-school fighter. His original script describes Brewer as a lanky, but muscular guy who has boyish good looks and hair cut so short it barely qualifies as stubble, as well as one of those hard-to-dislike southern accents, an extreme contrast with Stallone's long-haired, low-talking hero. As First Blood Part 2 director, George P. Cosmatos revealed in a 2002 DVD featurette, the producers only had one person in mind for the part, John Travolta. It was supposed to be Sly and John Travolta together, Cosmatos said of the unlikely pair, who had recently teamed up for 1983's Staying Alive, the legendarily awful Saturday Night Fever sequel that Stallone directed. In the script, Rambo and Brewer are portrayed as a vintage odd couple, complete with comic asides like a scene where they try to out-alpha each other in a push-up contest at base camp. Once on the ground in Vietnam, they're similarly at odds, with Brewer chafing at his partner's wizened warrior act, while Rambo rolls his eyes at Brewer's reliance on high-tech firepower and corny jokes. The more time they spend behind enemy lines, though, the more they develop into a cohesive unit. Although Rambo's superiority as a soldier is never really in doubt, maybe that's the reason why the producers ultimately decided to ditch the Brewer character altogether. We were thinking about buddies, but we felt ultimately that this was about Rambo, Vina remarked in a featurette. The loss of Rambo's buddy also meant the loss of all the buddy comedy that Cameron wrote into the script, including a moment during the climactic helicopter chase where Brewer compares Rambo's piloting to Star Wars. Star Wars? Asks a puzzled pal that the duo rescued. You're gonna love it, Brewer replies. Mexico played Vietnam. Koch bowed out of continuing with the franchise he launched when he learned about Rambo's extreme makeover in First Blood Part 2. In my film, he's against killing. He won't kill anybody, the director explained to Entertainment Weekly. In the sequel, he's turned into a killing machine. He kills about 75 people. I said, hey, that's not the character I created. If you're gonna do that, good luck. Have a good time. The Italian-born Cosmatos eventually landed the gig, and had grand plans to shoot the film on location in northern Thailand. Unfortunately, a lack of resources and rising costs scuttled that plan, and the production settled south of the American border instead in the countryside surrounding Acapulco. We built rock quarries, rice paddies and statues to give you the feeling of Vietnam, Cosmatos explained on a commentary track featured on the Rambo DVD, adding that an early shot of a Buddha statue was filmed on a parking lot. The statue was a huge styrofoam statue painted gold. The director died in 2005. Other behind-the-scenes tricks included dumping pounds of instant coffee into the prison comp mud pit where Rambo is chained, and rigging up wires so that his arrows would always hit the right target. Years later, Rambo found his way back to Mexico in Rambo, Last Blood, the poorly reviewed fifth film that finds him battling a drug cartel using the tricks of the trade he picked up in Vietnam. In a case of history repeating itself, the Mexico sequences were filmed elsewhere, specifically a combination of Bulgaria and Louisiana. Rambo's big emotional moment hit the cutting room floor. Rambo isn't generally synonymous with romance, but First Blood Part 2 gives him the closest thing he's ever had to a love story. After parachuting into Vietnam, he meets up with on-the-ground covert agent Seo Phuong Bao, played by Singaporean-born actress Julia Nixon. The two survive various perils from river pirates to roving groups of Vietnamese soldiers until Rambo is captured and ends up in a particularly brutal prison camp overseen by Russian troops. Tortured within an inch of his life, he nonetheless summons the strength to turn the table on his captors. Co joins his escape attempt, and after a pitched battle with Vietnamese and Russian troops, the two eventually find a quiet spot for a rare quiet moment. "You look like hell, Rambo," Co tells him, before tenderly asking where he plans to go once he finds a way out of the Vietnam America by way of Thailand. Taking charge, she invites herself along and seals the invitation with a kiss. It goes without saying that Rambo's normally stoic face registers surprise, and maybe even a little fear, at this compassionate gesture. Stallone wrote this small love story, which I think makes him much more vulnerable, Cosmatos explained in a DVD featurette. Nixon, meanwhile, said that she pushed to include the kiss, despite it seeming potentially out of place in a combat movie. "I felt my character should have a possibility of what could happen between them, a sense of a dream that was in the making." Unfortunately, the kiss also seals Co's death warrant. As soon as they leave their hiding place, a hail of gunfire cuts her down. "Do not forget me," she says as she takes her final breaths, and Rambo proceeds to take his vengeance on her killers. Co lives on, after a fashion, in Rambo 3, which features Rambo wearing the Buddha symbol she gifts him. According to editors Mark Helfrich and Mark Goldblatt, Rambo's original reaction to his almost lover's death had to be cut from the movie since it sent the tone spiraling from tragic to comic. Rambo is holding her in his arms, a broken bar, and then he lets out the scream, "Ain't no ooh ooh ooh," and the camera popped out wider, 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 and the "ain't no" echoed across the land. The audience went wild. They started laughing hysterically. We looked at each other and said, "Hey, that comes out. Sounds like Rambo could take Darth Vader in a no-screaming contest." Ronald Reagan was Rambo's #1 fan as a veteran of war movies, though not of the front lines, as poor eyesight kept the reservist from serving overseas during World War II. President Ronald Reagan was particularly taken with First Blood Part 2. Throughout the summer of 1985, the 40th POTUS made numerous references to the film as it continued to rake in multiplex money. In June, for example, Reagan announced the release of 39 hostages from the TWA Flight 847 hijacking, and reportedly joked, "After seeing Rambo last night, I know what to do the next time this happens." 3 months later, Reagan again referenced Stallone's alter ego while discussing his tax reform plan. "When I think of all the good people who've pleaded with the federal government for years to clean up our tax structure, I am reminded of a recent, very popular movie, and in the spirit of Rambo, let me tell you we're going to win this time." For his part, Stallone seemed delighted by the Oval Office recognition. even gifting his biggest fan with the signed First Blood Part 2 poster that's currently housed at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation Institute. To President Reagan, best of life, and all the best for the future, the inscription reads. In later years, though, the actor expressed more ambivalence about being embraced so forcefully by the Reagan administration and, by extension, the mainstream Republican Party and its pursuit of a more interventionist foreign policy. I heard President Reagan quoting lines from Rambo, Stallone remarked in the 2002 featurette, "Guts and Glory." I was proud, but I also was a little apprehensive about the reaction. Right now, it had taken a political form. People thought, okay, Rambo is a Republican. The star goes on to argue that the embrace of Rambo by Republican politicians, as well as the military, obscures what the character actually stands for. Rambo denies any association with the military. He's not part of it. It became, Army equals Rambo, which is unfortunate because the man and the military are the real deal. Rambo is fiction. Review. 6 Sylvester Stallone is still as famous as he was back in the 80s. With a lengthy roster of movies under his belt, many of which were successful franchises, he particularly did not like Rambo, First Blood, 1982. Interestingly, the movie was a huge commercial and critical hit, which was a huge deal because it was his first non-Rocky movie that made it big at the box office. Sylvester Stallone believed First Blood would end his acting career. Speaking on The Howard Stern Show, action legend Sylvester Stallone confessed he hated First Blood and thought it was a bad movie. He even expected it would ruin his already established career. All thanks to Rocky. I looked at this, I'm going, this is a career killer. This film, when we did it, it was so bada, at least I thought, and even my manager, we both went out. I think we both retched together in the alley. We tried to buy it back and burned a negative. First Blood, on my children, we tried to buy it back and burned a negative. The actor shared some scenes which he specifically found revolting, though nothing was more cringeworthy than the character's dialogues. Originally, it was 3 hours long. I stayed an hour and a half in the woods chasing guys. And plus, I was pontificating throughout the thing. For example, I shoot an owl, and then the owl drops. I go, "Hey, take that, you mouse-munching mother," pauses. I said, "Hey, I can't say this." And then there'd be lines like the cop pulls me over, and he goes, "Hey, where do you think you're going?" I go, "Hey, did you ever see Easy Rider?" "Yeah, well, I'm Easy Walker." Despite feeling loathsome about the film, Stallone knew they could still remedy it by removing his lines. In fact, many action stars are men of few words. I said, "Here's a good idea, cut out all my dialogue, every line, and have other people talk about you," which by the way is not a bad way to live in general. Other people fill in the blanks, like the Greek chorus, you know. And I think that works really well. Stallone's suggestion helped save the movie and himself from embarrassment. The first cut was 3 hours long and filled with cheesy lines, but having removed all the unnecessary ones, it was trimmed to a 90-minute film. Sylvester Stallone was not the top choice for John Rambo. First Blood grossed over $125 million against a meager production budget of $15 million. Initially, the studio did not want Stallone for the lead role. He said in the same interview with Howard Stern, "I think they were going to lab animals before they got to me. They went through every actor in the system and they eventually said, hey, okay, De Niro, Nick Nolte, Zippy the Monkey, let's go to Sly." In the end, it was the famed action hero who brought the Rambo franchise to the spotlight and made it one of the most iconic action films of all time. Review. 7 The following article discusses post-traumatic stress disorder and suicide. Aside from Rocky Balboa, there's no denying that John J. Rambo is Sylvester Stallone's most iconic character. Since playing him for the first time in 1982's First Blood, Stallone has seen the character become a Hollywood icon through big bombastic action adventures. However, the film that started it all takes on a much different tone. It's somber and contemplative and has a lot to say about the psyche of a man who has endured the horrors of war. Stallone appreciates this, hence why he was willing to risk a legal battle and potentially his career to maintain it. In the closing moments of First Blood, Rambo is cornered during a showdown with law enforcement. His friend, Colonel Sam Troutman, Richard Crenna, is there to support him as he vents about the trauma he endured while serving in the Vietnam War. He stands down and is taken into custody, but that's not how the film was originally going to end. The intended conclusion would have seen Rambo either killed by Troutman or die by suicide, which Stallone was vehemently against. That's not the message. The only way out is to die? Stallone recalled in an interview with Tom Power. According to Stallone, director Ted Koch wasn't happy with his attempt to change the ending. After taking out his frustration on the set, he sued Stallone for committing to Rambo's survival. Stallone eventually begrudgingly filmed the death scene, though test audiences despised it, so Stallone's version ultimately made it into the final film. Stallone has always wanted to keep the Rambo films feeling genuine. The motivating factor behind Sylvester Stallone's decision to resist the planned ending to First Blood was his respect for military veterans, specifically those diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. He didn't want the film to indicate to them that they couldn't live their lives because of their condition. While First Blood sequels would move away from this more grounded theme in favor of turning Rambo into a cartoonish action hero, Stallone made it a priority to return to the franchise's roots as he brought it to a close. What I'm trying to show is how horrible war is and how you never get over it when you participate in it, and once you commit to it, you are now condemned by it, Stallone said while promoting what he's called the last installment in the Rambo saga, Rambo: Last Blood, via Sign Movie on YouTube. He adds that his goal was to make the gore as harrowing as possible in the film, not purely for frivolous reasons. He wanted to leave a lasting impression on the audience, reminding viewers of the horrific sights that have turned Rambo into the person he is. Regardless of how you may feel about the Rambo franchise, it's clear that Sylvester Stallone has always seen it as capable of being more than a string of entertaining,